is the UKIP leader Nigel Farage. Good afternoon to you. We'll have a look at the international refugee crisis in a moment, but first, if I could ask for your response on the net migration figures released, showing a 40% increase.
Yeah, I mean, they are the worst figures ever, and they represent borderless Britain. We have no control, and I think we've really had enough of governments pretending to us that they can set targets, that they have control, when the reality is we have an open door to nearly 500 million citizens from the European Union, and that is where the biggest growth has come from. You know, I mean, I warned a couple of years ago that if we open the doors to Romania and Bulgaria, it would lead to a large number of people coming. And the reason's obvious, because the minimum wage in Britain is 9 times higher than the minimum wage in Romania. So that is what we're seeing, and we have no control. Having said that, I myself am now very sceptical about these figures. There is a massive discrepancy between the ONS figures that we're seeing this morning and the number of people, for example, registering for national insurance numbers last year. And my suspicion is that actually the true net migration figure is much higher than 1/3
What would you guess that it might be?
I just don't know. But as I say, if you look at the discrepancy, I mean, you know, for example, about 150,000 people from Romania applied for national insurance numbers, yet the official figures this morning show that only 50,000 came. Something is wrong.
And would you, in all instances, say that migration is a negative or has a negative effect on the country?
No, goodness. You know, come on, we've never tried to say this, and it really has characterised the British debate over the last 10 years, that anybody that's tried to urge control has been demonised as somehow saying all migrants are bad. We are not saying that. What we are saying is that immigration into Britain could be a good and positive thing if we had the Australian-style point system, if we could choose people on the basis of skills, if we were able to find out whether people had criminal records, if we insisted that people brought with them their own medical insurance, if they were not able to claim benefits for the first 5 years. Get those criteria right, as Australia, as many countries around the world do, and your programme wouldn't even discuss immigration because it wouldn't be an issue.
But your hashtag on Twitter today was borderless Britain, I think it was. I mean, you're suggesting that really being part of Europe means that we can have no control, and therefore your response and your answer to the problem would be really that we should be out of Europe.
Here's the choice. If you want to have an immigration policy, if you want to be in control of your borders so that you can decide how many people ultimately come to this country, then you cannot be a member of the European political union. It's as simple as that. This is the great truth that this government and the one before have tried to suppress. They've tried to say that EU membership and control of borders are different things. They're not. They're one and the same. I think the great British public are beginning to understand this. And if you look at the polling figures that came out at the end of July, immigration is now far and away the single most important issue in people's minds. And my guess is that when we do get our referendum on EU membership, whether we can control our borders or not is likely to be the issue that determines whether it's a yes or a no.
When you look at the refugee crisis unfolding, to you, is that a separate matter? Do you see that as different to the migration figures that we're discussing today? People that are using the route through Hungary to get into Europe, is that a separate issue entirely?
It is really, although of course people coming in through Hungary or Greece or Italy or wherever else it may be, if at some point in time the north and south of Europe can't agree on sharing out the numbers, you know, if the Italian government, for argument's sake, decided to grant all of these people EU passports, well then, you know, Italian passports, well then of course they could all come to Britain legally anyway. At the moment, we've got 5,000 people camped at Calais trying to come to Britain illegally. I tried my best in April of this year, during the general election campaign, to point out that the EU had made a fundamental mistake and one that would knock on to us. They implemented in April the EU's common asylum policy. This was a policy that was drawn up years before anybody foresaw, you know, the events in North Africa, the Middle East, Syria, etc. And effectively, anybody that arrives in Greece or Italy or gets through the border into Hungary, anyone that arrives is being told, yes, you can stay, you must register. And that's why we've got these streams of people. That's why we've got a movement of people now that I think could ultimately become an exodus of biblical proportions. And the north of Europe is now very clearly saying no, we don't want to share these numbers. We're seeing the growth of political parties. I mean, take Sweden, for example, where the Swedish Democrats, a party with a murky past, but has tried to clean up, is now leading the opinion polls in Sweden. And I think what the EU needs to do is to look at what the Australians did back in 2008. If you send the signal that anybody that comes will be accepted, they will come.
The government would dispute that they are sending that signal, but do you think that Britain is doing its fair share in taking in legitimate refugees?
Well, no, we're not, because, you know, the whole question of legitimate refugees has now, frankly, been dwarfed by this huge movement of people. Huge movement of people within the European Union to Britain, and a huge movement of people from the Middle East and North Africa into the European Union. We've lost sight of what is a traditional refugee. A traditional refugee is, you know, a French Huguenot, which my family were a long time ago, a Jewish person from Russia, Germany, Austria, an Asian from Uganda, people who, because of their race, ethnicity or religion, were singled out and whose lives were directly under threat. And what the EU has done is to set the bounds so broadly that it means anybody coming from a poor country or a war-torn region. So we've lost sight, perhaps, of what a good refugee policy would be.
Nigel Farage, thank you.